Well, good morning. What? Good morning. Good afternoon, evening, wherever you're located, because some people may be tuning in from other parts of the world. Welcome to the Elliott School of International Affairs in Washington, D.C. I'm James Foster, the Oliver P. Carr Jr. Professor of International Affairs and Professor of Economics. I welcome you to today's wonderful event. I'm also the director of the Yunus Initiative for Extreme Deprivation here at the George Washington University. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by Alex Counts, founder of the Grameen Foundation, whose journey from undergraduate school at Cornell University to his work in philanthropy is legend. Alex began with a Fulbright to Bangladesh, the same fellowship program that brought Dr. Yunus to Vanderbilt's graduate program in economic development in 1965. Alex worked in microcredit out in Bangladesh for 10 years and founded the Grameen Foundation back here, becoming president and CEO in 1997. It wasn't that long afterwards that actually I met Alex first. It was right around 2001, I think. And I had a bus full of students from that very same program, graduate program in economic development, Dr. Yunus had been to. And we were visiting the offices right around, I think it was near the White House, those offices, old building near the White House. And Alex wowed the students then, and I believe that he will wow you today. The formal portion of his talk today is entitled Top Lessons I Have Learned from Muhammad Yunus During the Last 38 Years. There's no one else who could give this talk. But he requested, to keep it short. He wants to let you all have a lot of Q&A time. So students, I'm counting on you. Now, I want to tell everyone else that this event is actually a number of things in one. First of all, welcome my GW class in economic development. Today's lecture will discuss NGOs and microcredit and many other development topics in a far more authentic way than I myself could ever do. It follows a long tradition of having friends from the neighborhood and from around the world help us in our quest to create value for our students and to make them better prepared for changing the world. Just this year, students have seen Luis Felipe Lopez Calva, director of the Poverty and Equity Global Practice at the World Bank, chief economist of the World Bank, Inda McGill, and my co-author, Sabina Alkar of Oxford. It's great to have good friends help you teach class. Next, this is our second event for the new Yunus Initiative in Extreme Deprivation, of which I'm the inaugural director. The initiative is formally a part of the Institute for International Economic Poverty, or IIEP, poverty. Slip of the tongue, isn't it? For economic policy. And the director of this great institution is Steve Saranovic. So thank you so much for helping to organize all the events and the great food in the back of the room. We really appreciate everything. Alex, who's here, the other Alex, who's here, thank you so much. The goal of the Yunus Initiative is to connect GW students and other colleagues to the ideas percolating around the works of Dr. Yunus, including new understandings of what it means to be deprived and novel solutions. For several years, GW students have traveled to Bangladesh as Grameen interns, learning firsthand about the Grameen Bank. And one of our graduate students, Ethan Kerr, recently returned from Paraguay, where he visited the Poverty Stoplight Initiative there, which is originated by GW alumnus Martin Burt. We're thankful to the support of Chris Fussner, whose generosity makes this all possible and who has facilitated numerous visits by Dr. Yunus here in the past. We're hoping that Dr. Yunus can join us again, but no, he's been a bit busy recently with governmental affairs in Bangladesh. If you'd like to hear more about the Yunus Initiative or help make things happen, just contact me. James Foster at fosterje@gwu.edu, or speak to anyone on the team here, including, I see Jordan, I see Jay Denise and others here. So just walk up to someone who seems to know what they're doing. Oh, Rubia, they're there as well. Okay, and while you're here, please have a look up at the front. Alex's books, many of them are listed here. Pick one up. I'm planning to do so myself. So, all right, I'm done talking now. Let me turn the podium over to our speaker, Alex.
Wow. I'm super pleased that you all have come. Professor Yunus, who I've been, when I was invited to do this, I was asked what I would want to speak about, and so I thought, what do I want to speak about? What would you all like to hear about that you have this program in Professor Yunus's name? And I said, well, I'm one of the few people that's worked with him for almost 40 years. I mean, there's some who've worked longer, but and I said, and I'm in this phase of my life where I'm trying to figure out, just think about what I've learned in my life to maybe pass on to the next generation who are going to inherit my generation, the problems we solved, the problems we failed to solve, and the problems we created. And so we've learned some lessons, and so I said a bunch of those lessons I've learned from him. But one of his big focuses, like mine, is to also equip the next generation of leaders in business, in politics, in social business, in social reform. And that's one of the reasons he's invested so much time in setting up these Yunus centers at various universities around the world. But the one here, also the closest one to where I work and live, is really known as one of the best in the world of all the Yunus centers. And really congratulations to all of you who make it happen. And thank you for inviting me. I'm really pleased. I have some people Tom Timberg, who I was the first non-Bangladeshi I ever knew who could read Bangla. And he was my early mentor in this. And then my wife is here. My co-teacher at a course at Johns Hopkins University, SAIS, is here, and a few other people. But most of you are unknown to me, which is very exciting, actually, because all those folks have heard me talk a lot of times. Are probably bored with some of the things I'll have to say. But just let me, Muhammad Yunus, most of you know him, but the Nobel laureate from Bangladesh. So the man who taught me these 16 lessons that I'm going to share with you before we have more of a conversation. Was a child prodigy in southern Bangladesh, and then just went to university and then got a Fulbright to come to the U.S. in 1965. Studied economics. Went back home and got a government job, which was what you were supposed to do. He was actually still teaching in the U.S., but then Bangladesh won its independence in the War of 1971, and he closed down his life here and said, "I want to go back to serve my country now that it's an independent country." And so, how do you serve it? Well, a mentor kind of gave him a government job, except like a lot of government jobs in that era in Bangladesh, they never gave him any work to do. He just sat at his desk and they'd give him a newspaper to read, and he'd read that, and then he'd go home. And he kind of had patience to do that for about 3 weeks. And he's like, I'm done with this. I want to be part of nation building. So he took a teaching job in Chittagong University, where he's from. And yet it felt very empty teaching these theories that he'd learned at Vanderbilt. And while starvation racked the countryside. So he talked about extreme deprivation, 1974 in Bangladesh. And so he started just walking around the villages just to figure out what was going on, to try to match the theories he'd learned in economics, getting a PhD, with the reality. And through a series of experiments, he and hundreds and hundreds of conversations, he developed what became the Grameen Bank. It began as just a credit program, but it grew into a fully fledged billion-dollar bank, lending to the poor and destitute women of his country, and became a model for micro-lending and microcredit around the world. And by the way, one of my books, which was originally written in the 90s and has been fully updated, it's basically the closest thing there is to a biography of him, while it also talks about Grameen Bank from the field level and how Grameen Bank came to the United States and became a force for addressing poverty here. So, And so that's, and Muhammad Yunus, he's, right now the head of government, Bangladesh, leading a transitional government after a revolution last summer. And it's just an extraordinary guy. Those of you who met him, you know what I'm saying. And those of you who haven't, hopefully you'll have a chance soon. I think he's committed to coming here after he, leaves power in February. My story, which is told in a different book, I wrote a midlife memoir called Changing the World Without Losing Your Mind. And it overlaps some with the Grameen story, because my story, but basically I grew up in New York City, and I got a social conscience by watching some other students do activism in high school and college. I saw the movie Gandhi when I was a junior in high school. It touched something deep in me. I was going to look for a South Asian guru, kind of in that Gandhi mode. And anyway, I went on my Fulbright in 1988 and began a 38-year relationship with Muhammad Yunus. I actually met him the year before, so I guess because it's 87 when I first met him. And so, and somewhere in that process, I wrote the first edition of that book. And but at some point, Professor Yunus said to me, well, we're ready to start an international arm of Grameen. And what he didn't say, but he never really trusted anyone who really knew Grameen deeply in their bones to be the international representative. What he didn't say, and what he maybe even didn't know, was that I was completely unprepared to start an international organization at 30 years old. But like a lot of things in life, and like as of you students, somewhere in your career in the next few years, someone's going to throw you off the deep end for a job you're completely unprepared for, and you're going to rise to the occasion. And you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and those will teach you to be a better professional and maybe a better human being. So that's a lot of what my book is how I was thrown this, he gave me a seed grant of $6,000. So 1997, so maybe today is worth $10,000 or $15,000. If anyone ever tells you that that amount of money is enough to start an organization, come talk to me first. It's not, but we made it work. And so I tell the story of launching Grameen Foundation, trying to be a worthy international partner of his. We grew it to a $25 million annual budget, and it became a pretty substantial organization. I ran it for 18 years, and then it was time to turn it over. And the last chapter of that book is called Letting Go, because sometimes you do something for a long time, and then there's the writing on the wall that it's time for you to turn over a leadership role to someone else and find a new calling, and without maybe knowing exactly what that is. And in 2015, that was it for me. And I talk about what it's like to let go of something that you've started. I really encourage you, before I get to these 16 lessons, or as many of them seem to be resonating with you all, I would encourage all of you, as you go through your life, to actually take time to write down what you're doing and especially what you're learning. Because this exercise that I did here, and the smaller white book is a kind of a spin-off of the memoir. I'll tell you a little story. My father was a psychiatrist. And so as part of becoming a psychiatrist, you have to undergo a lot of therapy yourself to understand yourself deeply if you're going to be help other people. So in his late 70s, this is a man who's obviously examined his life more than probably 99% of people. And he sat down with my younger brother, who at that point was in his, I don't know, maybe mid-30s or something. And he started telling my brother his life story. Because my brother just wanted to fill in the gaps of what we didn't really know about his life. And the interesting thing is, my father said to my brother when they were doing this, and I tell this story in my memoir, he said, just by telling his story of his life to someone else verbally or in writing, but in this case verbally, he saw trends in his life that he'd never seen before in 78 years. That process of like all these things jumble around in your head. I have this memory, and I screwed up here, and this was fun, and these people were great, and why aren't I doing that anymore? But when you actually form all those random thoughts that we have into a coherent narrative in writing or to another human being verbally, you start to kind of form something more valuable than all those random thoughts. And it just helps you see insights about your own capabilities, your own weaknesses, your own desires. And so I would encourage you, you don't necessarily go to the extent of writing a memoir, But that process, maybe it's a diary, maybe you do it, I write, maybe you do it in a play or in a painting, but express yourself, your journey and what you're doing and what you're learning can be an enormous growth opportunity, and it was for me. The last thing I'll say is, oh, and just in terms of engaging with your mentors, and I encourage you to find mentors. Some of them you'll actually call a mentor. Some of them they'll just interact with like they're a mentor. You may never use that term, but what you'll find is what I found. You may find is that for the students in the room is you find a mentor and you start when you really just admire them, maybe almost idolize them beyond what probably any human being can live up to. Then you start almost kind of like imitating them. You can almost kind of like end up aping them. And you adopt sometimes even their tone of voice, and you sometimes you like adopt their haircut, and their stock phrases, and it's a very basic form of learning from someone. But then you start to realize that not everything they do you want to do, or not everything they do you admire, or not everything you do fits your style. And then you start kind of adapting, and you start saying, here are things they do that I'm going to do exactly as they do. Here are these things I'm going to adapt to my own style and values. And here are some things I'm not going to do. It works for them, but that's not me. And that's kind of how it's gone with me with Muhammad Yunus over the last 38 years. And so I boiled down specifically for this talk. I've never given this talk before. So I have, as you do in public speaking, you have some stock speeches you do, and you make little changes, and it can be kind of smooth, maybe even a little slick. This isn't that. This is I'm going to be kind of almost workshopping this in front of you, so bear with me if I lose a train of thought or it doesn't come out perfectly. So let me launch in. In Grameen Bank there are 16 decisions that the borrowers take for improving their lives. I have 16 lessons and I may write this up on my blog, my Medium blog, if it seems to work. But let me start with one, and I'll come out here just because it's a little more. So I was having dinner with Muhammad Yunus about less than a mile from here in 1990, and he was in town visiting. I was working here in the U.S. It was between my 2 times living in Bangladesh, and he had just been through a very, very stressful period running Grameen Bank, where Grameen Bank's future was imperiled by a couple of crises. And I'd seen him. I talked to him on the phone when this was going on. I tried to help in a small way. And I sat with him at a restaurant here in Georgetown, and I said, Professor Yunus, how do you remain so calm amidst these terrible, stressful crises? And he said something to me that these little sayings that kind of, I don't know if he made this up or he heard it from someone. He said, well, Alex, a captain of a boat cannot show his skill on calm waters. Right? So this is what I hear. This is what I'm here for. This is what I'm trained for, is to deal with the times. In fact, it's almost a little boring when things are going kind of smoothly. And I'm like, wow, he embraces that. I would scare the hell out of me to go through what he just went through. But I'll tell you something, and this is where these lessons kind of become part of you. I run an organization part-time called the India Philanthropy Alliance. And Arathi is involved in that and so forth. And this past April, we lost almost 40% of our funding in one email. So we're about a $700,000 organization. So we lost, $275,000. A foundation said we were going to give you this money, but we run into problems, so we're not going to give it to you. And I remember, so my first thought was what? Damn, I'm too old for this. We built, I gotta raise $275,000 just to get back to my level in the next few months. So man, I have plans for this summer. But then the next thing that came to my mind was Muhammad Yunus saying, a captain can't show his skill on calm water. And then I started talking myself into, this is what I've been trained for. I've raised $300 million in my life. I've led teams through crises. I can do this. And he would expect me to do this. And as of yesterday, we're within $15,000 of raising the 275 that we lost. So it's going to happen. It's whether it's a week or 2 or 3. So that's that lesson. If I were to only give you one of the 16, that would be it. Is embrace the challenging things, because that's where the learning is. That's where you can show your skill. That's where you can build your skill. The second thing I'd say about him, and it took me a while to understand this, he's a man on the one hand that has a very big vision. Like he'll say things that, like the experts, like people, not Tom, but people like, or like intellectual development types will dismiss. He'll say, we are going to end poverty in the world. Zero poverty, zero unemployment. And people like, that's never possible. You know, these people who, you know, that's, you know, and he almost loses a little credibility with the experts because they say that he's just, but he's trying to communicate to a larger audience and inspire them with a simple, compelling vision, which actually might be true. I mean, many things in our lifetime that we thought were unrealistic, like that gays and lesbians would be able to marry. If you said in the year 2005 that would be the reality, like unrealistic, will never happen. Except 10 years later, through a lot of great organizing and stuff, it did happen. But he'll put out things like this. So on the one hand, he's a visionary at the strategic level, but he's truly an incrementalist, what I call an incrementalist at the tactical level. Like he's not waiting for some big revolution. He's like, we got to lend money to the poor and do it like 5% better next quarter than we did this quarter, and then 5% better the next quarter. And we need to have an endless amount, this endless tinkering to make what you're doing better, knowing that fallible human beings will not, you know, once in a while you'll go do it 5% worse, but you just keep plugging away. You know, it's you know, as you say in football, 3 yards in a cloud of dust is where most progress is incremental. But the motivation to keep that going, to keep those incremental to go to 5 or 6 or 7% better a quarter, comes from for a lot of people, a big vision, a bold vision that probably the experts will say is unrealistic, and may be unrealistic or may not be. And so this is where, so he is strategically a visionary, almost to the point of losing credibility sometimes, but tactically an incrementalist. Let's just do it a little better. Let's not, and this comes another lesson he learned, a related one. By the way, not all of this list is in the proper order because I've just been throwing together, but this one is he taught me, never said this, but in nonprofit work where you're trying to change the world, where you don't necessarily have the resources you need, like in a major corporation, like if you work for Goldman Sachs, you got to make your peace with the fact that in nonprofit work and other types of work too, where you're under-resourced, good is often good enough. If you push yourself and your team to be perfect all the time, you're going to burn them and yourself out. And, you know, and you want everything you have control over. You want that protest or that feeding program or that homeless initiative to be just exactly right. It can't be. You don't have the resources to do that. You can't concentrate on that few things that can be perfect because you have to do so much. But you also have to realize that some things do need to be perfect. And understanding what are those 15% of things that you need to make pretty much perfect, and what are the 85% where good is good enough. That's what it means to be a mature professional. But a lot of young nonprofit leaders, they're just so pent up, want to change the world, and there's a lot of things we need to change about the world right now, God knows. But you know, you want to do something and you just drive everyone to have it be absolutely perfect, you're going to drive yourself nuts if that becomes your default. So good is often good enough. Here's a totally different theme. Muhammad Yunus, I was in the hospital. I spent like maybe 12 or 13 days in the hospital in my life. I've been blessed with good health. But I was in the hospital with vertigo. They didn't know it was vertigo. And you know, I had most of my family call me or contact me. Muhammad Yunus sent me like 7 emails in 2 days. He's running the damn country. Well, no, he wasn't running the country yet. He was being persecuted by the government of the country. That was come later. He's calling Emily. He doesn't want to. He's calling Emily probably every 6 hours. That uncommon concern for the well-being of people that have invested in your organization, your vision. I mean, over-the-top concern for their well-being if they're going through a hard time is just a signature of him. And I so many times in my career, I'm like, he's calling me? Me? You know, again? But, you know, that buys that emotional kind of, you know, people talk about putting emotional kind of payment in the piggy bank, you know, because then there are times, and one of the things I've come to realize is as a leader, sometimes you make mistakes. Sometimes you make terrible mistakes. How do you keep the team around you loyal to you? and willing to pick up from that mistake that you as the leader made, one of the strategies is to show uncommon concern for them in their moments of need. Show that personal concern. And it's not like, I've gotten calls from friends and bosses, and it's just like they're ticking it off. Like, I wanted to say I called him. Like, Muhammad Yunus is sending me these, but you're always so healthy, Alex. You work out the gym every day. Why are you in the hospital? How can I help? It's really like, it's not phoning it in. And I've done that. I've adopted that. When you have to criticize people when they make mistakes, especially if they don't understand they've made a mistake, when they misbehave, when they were out of line. But one of the things he taught me is when you criticize someone you have or want to develop a relationship with, it sounds obvious, but it's not as practiced as much as as it should be, is criticize them privately, basically, what did I, directly and privately. Sorry. So sometimes, sometimes you get criticized. I've done this where, you make a mistake and I start complaining to your colleagues. You know what she did? It's just whatever, and it's just, it's that gossipy part of us as human beings who just we fall into. Or sometimes, no, she made a mistake, and I'll just in front of everyone say, that was a really dumb thing to say. Where are you coming from? And we, as leaders, we forget how humiliating that is. We forget how what you withdraw from the emotional bank account from that. We think it's nothing. It was just a little look. And so Muhammad Yunus, I'm not going to tell stories with every one of these, but when I had been at Grameen Bank on my Fulbright for 2 or 3 months, he invited me into a meeting with some visiting folks from Sri Lanka or India. And they were asking him questions. And by this point, I think I'm a big expert on Grameen too. So like he would answer the question and I would piggyback on. And let me add a few other things, as if like I'm like a Muhammad Yunus too or something. And it was totally inappropriate. And I wrote about this in the book, but I didn't know it was inappropriate. I'm 22 years old. I've got energy and smarts, but lacking in maturity. So he betrayed nothing, just went on. He called me into his office privately a few weeks later and just said that was not appropriate. And I was kind of crushed, and I actually couldn't see why he would say that at that moment. But the fact that he handled it that way made all the difference. And as much as possible, I've tried to practice that as well. If you're going to be a social entrepreneur and you're going to build a movement, you need to, and you have a social innovation that works, or you're building one, you need to be comfortable telling the same story over and over and over and over and over, and not bore yourself when you're doing it, and not make it sound like you're going into rote mode. You got to tell this. I've heard Muhammad Yunus tell a version of his story probably over 1,000 times. I've heard he's given it probably more than 10,000 times, and yet every time it sounds fresh like the first time he ever delivered it. I still struggle with that. I bore myself if I tell the same story over and over. And that's one of the reasons I'm not giving you my stock speech here. I wanted to kind of test out some new material and some new ideas. But he has a story that works, that motivates people, that enlightens people, and he'll give the same speech 4 or 5 times in a day. And yet each time it feels like to the audience like he's telling it for the very first time. That's a skill that he has that I'm still in the process of developing. What do they tell you when you're learning to write in college? What's the thing they say? Don't do this, do this instead.
Don't write too much, be precise and be specific.
Yep. No, that's good. I'm thinking something slightly different, but absolutely. But there's something. Maybe it was my generation. That's right. Show, don't tell. So I actually still don't really understand what that means. But the fact that I've written 3 books, I must have sorted that out somewhere. And I thought about that because Muhammad Yunus, he inspires his colleagues, the people that work with him, to really work very hard and to work very frugally. And you know what? I've never heard him say to anyone anything remotely like, you need to work harder, or you need to be a very careful steward. You need to be very stingy with how you use our organization's resources. Now, there are policies that require it, but he often expects people, I think, to go beyond that, to be extremely frugal, almost to the point of being sacrificial, and to work extremely hard. How does he do it? I've never seen him tell people to do that. He leads by example. People, you walk, I mean, for decades, you walk into his, I said this actually in Bengali at an interview a few weeks ago. And he said, up until literally he turned 80, I'd never seen him in a car that was air conditioned, in his residence that was air conditioned, or in his office that was air conditioned, in the stifling heat of Bangladesh. And I'm like, dude, like, take care of yourself. But it's like, if I start bringing in all these conveniences, everyone else is going to demand them. And they're not actually essential. They're nice. And so when he, in terms of his frugality, his integrity of using resources, and his work ethic, it just comes from people watching what he does, not what he says. And again, many of these things I've adapted imperfectly or partially or totally, but it's been fascinating to that. If you look at it, I used to sit. I was very friendly with his kind of the head of his personal staff, and we'd drink tea, and you just watch people walk out of Muhammad Yunus's office after meeting him, and they all had this glow about them, like what they said on their face was, I must have been the most important person he met today because of the way he treated me, because the way he focused on me. He wasn't taking calls and, doing all his work, but he did that with everyone. And one of the things that he's, besides just having the common courtesy to pay attention to the person you're talking to, which is not universally practiced, to say the least. The other thing he does, especially in his one-on-one meetings, in small group meetings, in large speeches, is he'll talk about what he believes and what he's done, but he always pivots pretty quickly to what you all can do, what your potential is, the changes you can make in the world, how you as young people you've been grown up with technologies that can change the world that you know better than those of us that are of our age. And so that's the interesting thing of you'll see a lot of leaders who when they get up and talk, they want to leave you with how powerful they are, how skilled and accomplished they are. And the thing that he inevitably moves to when he talks is he comes back to, no, it's how powerful you are, what you can accomplish, And this has almost become more accentuated in recent years as he's entered his 80s. And he said, the next generation, you all are on point to take this world to a better place. And it's not going to be me, it's going to be you. And so you always see people coming out of his talks and just saying, if they've really listened to him and agreed, they're like, wow, I can do a lot more than I thought, rather than what an accomplished man. Though they may think both, but he's trying to really emphasize their own power. Yeah, he in his work in microfinance, he always invited the researchers to come and research and to tell him what was working and not working. Some people that do social change, they don't like the outside researchers that come in and evaluate them, and maybe they're going to find that what we're doing is not working, and then we can't raise money and all that. He never went that way, but he wasn't a slave to the researchers just coming in on their terms, because some researchers have an agenda. Some researchers are only looking for things that don't work, especially if they're rumored to work. So he had a rule that guided him for decades. I thought it made a lot of sense, which is, if you're a researcher, you want to research something about whether Grameen Bank is doing a good job. I'm interested in that question too, so come on in. However, the only thing you have to agree to is, and some researchers didn't agree to this, most of them did, is when you come out with your final study, if we disagree with it, we get to write our response to your research, and it's in the same volume as your research. So we get our rebuttal option. And so I think very rarely did he take it, but it kind of kept the researchers a little honest. That if we if we have some criticisms that aren't well grounded, you know, we have to publish his response. So bring in people that can criticize you, that can evaluate you, but bring them in on your terms. And the same thing went with donors. There were a lot of money, people wanted to throw money at Grameen at various points when they were on their growth trajectory. And he became very frustrated because, you know, the Swedish, you know, government wanted to give him, but they had their 1,200 forms, and then the Norwegians, and then the Canadians, and then the Ford Foundation and all that. And he said, at one point he said, stop it, guys, wait. And then they all had advice for him about how to spend the money. Say, I know you like to do this micro lending thing, but could you add on this or that or the other thing on top of it? And just one point he said, like, okay, I get the game here, folks, that you see us as subcontractors for what the Swedish government wants to do in Bangladesh. This is our country. So here's what he did. And Fazıl Abed basically did the same thing at the same time. But Fazıl Abed, incredible man, highest respect for him. And they both said to the donors, you guys need to get your act together. So if you believe in what we're doing with Grameen, then support us. And if you don't, do something else. We'll find money our own way. And I'm tired with filling out all the Swedish forms, the Norwegian forms, the Canadian forms, the Ford Foundation forms. You need to create a single form. You need to get your act together. And they created something called the Donor Liaison Office, DLO. And so all the donors to Grameen and all the donors to BRAC, they had to organize themselves so they appeared as one donor to simplify things for Grameen. And they had to agree that that they weren't going to try to micromanage what he was doing. They could leave, stop donating, fine. But this wasn't their project. This was his. Because this was Bangladesh, and he was a citizen of Bangladesh. So whether it's researchers or donors or other type of partners, invite them in, but on your terms. And this goes to yet another one. Some of these are very related. Is be a hard negotiator. Be willing to walk away from a deal that doesn't make sense to you. I'll tell a story. I was having a meeting. Professor Yunus was trying to raise money for the international work of Grameen, which would then grow into Grameen Foundation. And when Bill Clinton was elected, there was a new administrator of USAID, and he asked Professor Yunus to meet, you know, to work out a project. And I happened to be in Washington at the time, so I went to meet with USAID. And I said, here's what Professor Yunus would like to do. And they said, that's very nice, but we'd like you to do something else. And so I said, Professor Yunus, what do I do? I guess we're going to need to do what they want, right? We'll, you know, try to influence it. And he said, oh, no. He said, tell them essentially this, and then start to walk out the room. And these were the days where you could walk into USAID unaccompanied, right? I mean, I could have really walked to the elevator and left. And he said, and if they follow you out the door and beg you to come back, then you're on the right path. And if they don't, then this wasn't meant to be. And I said, are you really, sir? This could be a couple $1 million. He said, yeah, that's how to do it. So like, I'm 23. And so I say basically, I understand that that's what you want, but we'd like to approach it this way. They said, no. I said, okay, well then conversation's over. Thanks very much. I'll be seeing you. And these people, much more older, mature, and experienced international development, just came running after me. And they said, whoa, wait a second. Because, you know, one of the things you realize in negotiating is sometimes you have a lot less leverage than you think, and sometimes you have a lot more. And what I understood later is their administrator, Brian Atwood, really wanted to do a deal with Muhammad Yunus. So by walking out, they had to basically fold their hand and say, okay, well, what do you guys want to do? Forget our ideas. What do you want to do? Now, sometimes you have less leverage than you realize. I talk about that in my book. But in this case, you had more. But whatever the case is, he was always willing to walk away from a deal that didn't make sense to him. And I'll just always remember that moment when they came running after me. It was so cool. So, and I'm actually kind of near the end here. Hopefully, we're okay. When people work for you, when you're a leader in an organization, one of the things I've discovered, observing how people regarded me as a leader. On the one hand, people don't want to work for an egomaniac or even a megalomaniac, and they're out there leaders. And if they can raise money, they can keep assembling teams and losing teams and reassembling teams. But people also want to be. So then you know, and a lot of people refer to Muhammad Yunus as a very humble man. And so I tried to kind of tap that humility part of leadership. And yet a consultant once told me, he said, Alex, you know, people want to be proud of their leader. Don't play the humble card too much. And so, then I observed him through that lens, and I saw that was how, as a leader, he would talk about his and his team's accomplishments, but he would do it in a very unassuming, quiet, humble kind of way, where he wasn't really, he wasn't, again, trying to convince you how great he was, but he was just saying, like, anyone can do what I did. You can do what I did. I've just worked pretty hard and made some mistakes and learned from them. But then he'll say, and here's what we accomplished. So I'm not going to distance myself, downplay my accomplishments, but do it in a way that it almost seems, it just seems a result of his, being a kind of a persistent, dogged person who just wouldn't give up, not because he's a superhuman person. So that balance between be humble, acknowledge the contributions of others on your team and in your field, but don't overplay the humble card, because if you don't tell people what you've accomplished, who will? But you need to find that modulation, that it doesn't come off as you as an egomaniac or you as an even megalomaniac. Sometimes I've observed him, he doesn't, sometimes when he communicates, he kind of throws out all nuance. And in doing that, sometimes we'll lose credibility with so-called experts. And so, for example, let me just take a kind of example. I can't think of a perfect one for his, but imagine you're running a social program. And the truth of the matter is, if you really dig deep into it, you'll say this program works well, except in some contexts it works okay, and in some contexts it doesn't work at all. That's the reality, right? And you're trying to figure it out, how to make it work better, where it works okay, and how to figure out how it works. And Muhammad Yunus would typically, speaking to a broad audience of experts and non-experts, would typically not say it works, that nuance of it works well in most cases, but et cetera. He would just say, this program works. Just a simple, clear message, which is essentially true, although technically false, right? But he's trying to communicate, he's trying to inspire people to dream of a better future and how they can play a role in that. And to be simple, to lack nuance, to speak in short declarative sentences is really how you kind of burst through the chaos and of all the communication that's out there. And so at times, as a public communicator, nuance is your friend. And I certainly use probably more nuance in my communication than he does, but sometimes it's your enemy, because all the clutter and clatter of communication that's out there, you start throwing in qualifiers and you just lose people, like, oh, works sometimes, not all, well, whatever. Let me get back to the, TV reruns or something. So nuance has its role, but speaking without nuance in clear statements, it might be, again, might be technically false, but in a certain big picture way true, can be very powerful. I felt him late in his career especially, he's been focused on the next generation of leaders, people like yourself, students, does a huge amount of speaking at universities. And, I have too. One of the things, another mentor of mine said to me at a certain point, he said, Alex, at a certain point, he'd been like the number 4 person at Microsoft, and then he ran another Silicon Valley company, billion-dollar company. And he said, Alex, one of the things I realized is that at a certain point in my career, most of what I was going to be able to accomplish, I would be accomplishing through others rather than what I did myself. And whether it's through your students or through your employees or people you speak to in university audiences. And that really struck me. That struck me that, wow, as much as I could work and produce, I could do so much more if I saw my influence on others as my main pathway to impact and changing the world. And in the case of this other mentor, just in making his company work well. And so I think that's really, especially as he's gone into his 70s and 80s, Professor Yunus, he's mainly trying to be a kind of a facilitator of a next generation of Yunuses, and giving people that kind of confidence, and it influences how you allocate your time and what you say and what you do and what you write. He's also broadened the movements he's been part of. He's become a big environmentalist. He used to be very focused, almost occasionally he would talk about kind of poverty reduction as being a trade-off with environmentalism. And then he's just said, no, this is one big movement. Almost like, Martin Luther King when he saw it's civil rights, but we need to also talk about Vietnam. And Muhammad Yunus has kind of broadened the movements. Two final things. I found that he likes to put himself around people who make him laugh. The fact that I have a decent sense of humor, at least in his view, is probably one of the reasons he's kind of kept me around as long as he has, 38 years. And don't underestimate the power of people who can sit with you and you can kind of together laugh at the absurdities of life. It relaxes you, I find. It broadens your perspective, and it just puts you in a better mood. And so I just noticed that people he tends to gravitate towards, you then watch him even from a distance, and if he's choosing to be with someone, within 10 minutes of their conversation, they're like uproariously laughing about something, and then getting very serious again as well. So think about the value of the people that you want to choose to be around in your organizations, in your families, among your friends. People who make you laugh, they're a special crop. And lastly, I've seen him I present him with an idea, and he'll come out unambiguously against it. Alex, that is a terrible idea. We will never do that. So, being clear about that, right? A lot of people, especially from certain cultures, it's particularly, I find it common in Asian cultures where people will say, yes, 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 but really what they're saying is no. And one of the things that maybe he adopted this from his years in the US, he's very comfortable saying, no, that makes no sense. We won't do that. But here's the interesting thing. And so I would be like, oh, I guess that's a bad idea, or it's a good idea that he doesn't see yet. And that how many times, whether it's a week or a month or 6 months or a year later, he'll come around and he'll embrace that idea. He'll gather new information because he's now thinking, Alex had this idea. It sounded like a terrible idea. But maybe he knows something I don't. Probably not. But maybe he does. So let me get curious. Let me ask some other people. He'll say, I heard this idea from Alex. What do you think? And if someone he trusts says, that could work. And then so you're unambiguous in your initial reaction to an idea, but you also are open to changing your mind. And then that also makes you feel good as the one who approached it. And you say, wow, I'm going to keep putting ideas out there, because even if he initially rejects it, he's now become curious that maybe there's something there. So take strong stands, but be open to revising with new information, and look for new information, because if someone you trust has an idea you don't think is right, they might be right. You might be right. Try to figure out. Anyway, those are the 16 lessons from Muhammad Yunus, 38 years. Thank you all for paying attention, being interested.
I have a couple of observations I wanted to start off with here. Just a couple questions from my point of view, and then I'll put it out to you all. You better be thinking now about your questions, because I'll walk over to you and ask you personally, what is the question you have? One thing that struck me years ago when I was in Nashville and had invited Dr. Yunus to give a talk at Vanderbilt, he was actually seeing his daughter's first performance in the opera. And I was sitting next to him at that time, and it was a glorious occasion because he was so happy and so proud. But backstage, I asked him a question that just struck me out of nowhere. I don't know where it came from. I said, Dr. Yunus, what is it you do for fun? So I wanted to know what you think his answer might be.
Well, I think on certain questions he's very consistent, and other questions he's quite inconsistent. I mean, being a human being, I guess you'd expect that. I think he would probably have said, number one, I get fun, I get joy from my work.
Boom.
But to go back to that, got that right. But I think there's a deeper answer to that, which is he also tries to make the work itself I mean, I think he takes satisfaction from doing things that improve people's lives.
That's it. That's exactly what he said.
But I think there's another thing deeper there, but maybe that's just my take on him, which is he also tries to make the process of that whole process a kind of enjoyable process. And that's why I mean, putting people around him who are just, you know, are curious like he is, are funny, make him laugh, aren't trying to manipulate him. I mean, so he tries to, in the people he works with, wherever he has the choice, it's people that just make that journey of impact enjoyable, fun, humorous, joyful.
And I think that that's the theme you had mentioned before that resonated with me. We do things here like have committee meetings. Committee meetings are usually boring, but you go to committee meetings in order to get a job done. Turns out that one of the things I learned years ago was exactly what you said. Make it fun. If you're the chair, make it fun. If you're sitting in the audience, make it fun. Have fun with people. It'll become memorable. And in fact, they become your colleagues even closer after that. So I have to admit that was resonating as well. Now, I'm going to turn it to you folks because you must have a question or two. And if you don't, then I'll ask you to have one. So who's going to go first? Jordan.
This a little bit earlier. And
Do we have a mic?
Yeah. So
Here it
the
is.
thousands of people online or
Yes.
or
all of
9
them.
or whatever can hear you.
Thank you. So you mentioned a little earlier, you were talking about leverage and how sometimes you have more leverage than you realize, but there's also times that you might have less leverage than you realize. And I know you said this was in your book, so I'll make sure to check that out. But can you tell us a little bit how you can tell how much leverage you have?
Well, it's yeah, you know, and in terms of less, I mean, I again, it you know, basically, if you're trying to negotiate something with someone, you know, you try to assess how badly do they want this to happen. And sometimes you just you get it in your mind that this person absolutely needs this to happen, and they will do anything. And sometimes you're wrong. They're like, no, we don't really need this. And on the other hand, in the case with USAID years ago, and that grant did get funded for $2 million in the end. And so in my negotiating, I'm just trying to figure out a couple things. Again, how badly do they want this? But also, who's the real decision maker here? Because the person you're negotiating with may want it, but the person they have to answer to might not. And so I'm just trying to, without being too intrusive, just trying to say, well, you know, who do you need to run this by? If we can come to agreement in principle and so forth. Especially, you know, that's what I would try to figure out. And so I'll you know, I put out, you know, sometimes I'll put out, well, maybe it makes sense to just put this on hold and revisit it in 6 months. Like, oh, no. Or maybe 12 months. So you vary your own level of urgency about it. You try to figure out, am I dealing with a decision maker? Am I dealing with someone who's an agent of the decision maker? And ultimately, you know, how important is this to them? Now, the people I was negotiating with USAID, I don't think they really wanted to get the deal done. They wanted to get it done on their terms, but they had to answer to someone who wanted to do a project with Muhammad Yunus. And if I'd been more sophisticated, I probably could have figured that out on my own. But I needed the you know, shock therapy coaching from him to put that to test and be willing to walk away. But yeah, just remaining curious. And what's, you know, sometimes we get so into, especially when we're inexperienced negotiators, we're so self-critical and we're looking at ourselves where we really should be looking at the person across the table and all the subtle cues and facial expressions and gestures and when they write something down and when they don't in their notebook. All those things give you signals of how bad do they want to get this deal done, or how bad does their organization, who they have to answer to, want to get this done. And then sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes you think, they need to get it done, I'm going to walk out of the room, and they don't walk after you. And sometimes you end up compromising on things you didn't have to. And then you just use that learning the next time to be a little bit more in tune, maybe be a little better negotiator.
Thank you.
It's a good question. Give her an A.
I'm Jordan Grossman. I'm an undergrad here.
Yeah.
And she's already got her score. She's done well. Thank you.
Oh, over here.
Great.
So I saw that you, of course, you're a founder. I'm trying to start my own foundation for kids in Congo, since I'm from there, to start providing free books and book bags for a lot of the children over there, since education isn't as available to them as it is here. And a lot of people have said that that's an audacious goal that most likely wouldn't happen. What is your piece of advice to keep somebody that's trying to do something this big to keep going?
Yeah. Well, I think to go back to a couple of things I said is to come up with a vision that really inspires you, that is borderline unattainable. And then to just try to assemble a people one by one. Certain things you can do in a flurry, but building a team of people who believe in your vision, it's something you build one brick at a time. And if you have a month or a quarter where you get one other person that believes in what you're doing even half as much as you do, that's a good quarter. And so you get people who are around you, and that I think those big visions inspire people, but also when people see that incremental progress towards that vision, even if it's 1,000-mile journey begins with one step, and that's also why I believe, and it's not unique to me, but celebrating small wins is an incredibly important part of keeping people motivated. Yeah. Even if it's very, very small compared to that big vision, progress is progress, and no progress is something completely different and very demotivating. And some leaders who have high expectations and want to get things, are impatient, and I'm certainly impatient, but I've learned to manage it, is if people feel like you're not making any progress, you start to emotionally kind of disconnect. And the other, just two things I'd say. I mean, my book, Changing the World Without Losing Your Mind, is really meant, I wrote it for the next generation of people starting and leading organizations. And I just tell mostly just mistakes I made in the process of starting an organization with Muhammad Yunus' support, which was a big advantage for sure. But then what those mistakes taught me. And the last thing I'll just say, probably channeling Professor Yunus especially, is if you're trying to give things away to people, if you're trying to give people access to something they want and need and can benefit from, you might not need to ask them to pay the full cost of that, but at least ask them to pay a token cost. Ask them to pay because it's a signal that they really want it. Because sometimes you want things for people that actually they don't really want. But sometimes they should want them, so you may want to continue. They may need them, but they may not want them. But by that market signal of I'm willing to pay 5% of the value of this, or maybe it's something even symbolic, saying I'm giving you this book, and what I'm asking you to do is to pay it forward in some way by volunteering your time with my organization or some other organization. Or maybe it's in the future, you would give 5 books to someone who needs them when you're ready in the future. So there's always a kind of exchange. It's not a one-way exchange, it's a two-way exchange. And it can mobilize resources, and it can demonstrate that there is a real want and a need there on the other side.
This is a lesson you should listen to carefully. Charity is a one-way direction downward. It creates the levels between people. Yunus throughout has kept this notion, everyone is equal. So it's a partnership. That's a big part of the ethos. And so I think this is something to listen to really carefully. Other questions? I know we have many, so I'm just jumping.
Oh, good.
Hello, my name's Andrew Brickman. I'm an undergraduate here at the Elliott School. You talked about how sometimes you'll be thrown into a situation where you will not know what the heck you're doing, but you have to just figure it out. So what happens when you fail? What happens when you aren't able to accomplish this task, or the task itself, it just isn't working? When do you know when to give up?
Well, or when do you know? Yeah, I mean, some things aren't meant to be. I mean, I'm kind of bullheaded. Muhammad Yunus is kind of bullheaded. My brother is an artist, a visual artist, and we're always just like, if I really believe in it, and and it hasn't worked, it's just because we haven't found the right approach yet. Now, there is a time where you need to pull the plug, and I've done that. But if I really believe in it, an interesting thing is the thing that's important in those moments where you may not have ultimately failed, but you've suffered a series of setbacks, is first of all to just have some sort of kind of emotional support team, whether it's a spouse, my wife is here, or it's a friend, or whatever, someplace you can just go and just mourn that you've put a lot of energy, maybe hundreds of hours into something, and it's completely flopped. And just grieve over that. That is something worth grieving over. But it may not, and maybe the grieving over it allows you to redouble and adopt a new strategy. The other thing, and there's a wonderful book, I don't know if some of you know, called Social Entrepreneurship, What Everyone Needs to Know, by my friends Susan Davis and David Bornstein. And I've given away more copies of that book than my own books for some strange reason. It's a great book. And they just study this process of social entrepreneurship. And they say something, they say, great social entrepreneurs, let me get the exact quote, when they fail, they don't see it as a factor of personal inadequacy, but a gap in their knowledge. I failed because there's something I don't understand yet, but when I understand it, I'll succeed. As opposed to, I'm just a rotten leader. I just can't execute. I don't have discipline. I don't have whatever. Like, get rid of that stuff. And it's just, no, there's something that some member of my team or something I need to know that when I get that, I can succeed. And it takes all that personal kind of self-flagellation out of it. It's just, no, I'm just going to go back again with a little different strategy. And but I've never really grappled this before, so bear with me. But the times where I've pulled a plug on a project, it's where I was in an organization where there was such opposition to that, continuing with that project among people I depended upon for much bigger things, that I pulled the plug, not because I didn't think I could ultimately succeed, but it would cost me too much in my relationships with people I depended on for other things. And so in that case, again, rarely would I ever give up. Rarely would I say we can't succeed, but the cost is too high. And the cost, not necessarily in money, though that can be a factor, but the cost of relationships with the people that are my partners in getting larger other things done that are important to me. Good question. Something over here, yeah?
Hello.
Okay. Well, next it'll be Rubio.
Send it over here, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
My name is Omkar Rao. I'm a undergraduate here at Elliott as well. Your experience with the international development space with like the UN organizations, as well as other donor nations like Sweden, Norway, other nations, do you think that they've been effective in achieving economic development in the global south? And what do you think needs to change, if there needs to be change in the whole development complex?
So a very small question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
There was a statement by an Israeli diplomat many years ago, and he said this, and sometimes I think this about international development agencies, is that you can always depend on them to do the right thing, but only after exhausting all their possibilities. And so, it's the mechanics of aid are quite cumbersome. And a lot of these are policies that are put in place, well-intentioned by national parliaments, by Congress, that kind of tie the hands. And each individual policy kind of makes sense, but the whole aggregation of them make it very hard. And so it's first of all, it's tough. If addressing the issues that aid addressed were easy, they'd already been solved. So by definition, these are some of the hardest problems. And then you have agencies which have all sorts of policy constraints on top of them. It's tough work. It's tough work to begin with, and it's tough. And I sometimes really, organizations that can set their own rules to a large extent, like the Ford Foundation, MasterCard Foundation, they have huge advantages, but they have often much less in the way of resources to spend. So I think that where aid has has done the best, and also sometimes failed horribly, is where people have like that model that where the donors in Bangladesh and when they related to Grameen and BRAC, back in the 90s, where they just kind of they reformed their policies and they got kind of hands off, and they said, we want to choose local actors who've got their act together, and Mackenzie Scott is practicing this kind of philanthropy now, and I'm going to like choose the best among them, and I'm going to get pretty hands off and give them resources, and if they meet the goals that they've set, and then I'm going to keep giving them money, and if they don't, maybe I won't. And so that really where it centers the initiative and the work of local actors who don't have anywhere else to go. I'm here in Bangladesh for USAID. In 3 years, I'm going to be in Ethiopia or Ghana or something. But the folks in Bangladesh, like that's it for them, and they have that special stake. They may, they don't. Doesn't mean they make every right decision. Doesn't mean they don't get pulled into politics. Doesn't mean there isn't a corruption and whatever. But I think aid that really centers the best of the local social entrepreneurs. It can get messy because some of them have great ideas and great motivations and they just flop. But just like a venture capitalist does, I'm going to put money on 10 companies. I'm not going to micromanage them, and I hope that 2 of them go great, and the other 8 I'm not going to worry about. I think that's where aid does its best, where policies allow, and a lot of us were very critical of USAID, but we also now we miss it a lot, and so it's easy to be critical of something that's a flawed but effective institution, and sometimes you only really understand what it did when you don't have it anymore. I think we had a question over here.
Yes, we're good.
No.
Behind, yes.
Yes.
Hello. Yeah. Hi, I am Rubaiyat, and I'm an international student in the International Development Studies program. And I'm a graduate student from Bangladesh. So thank you so much for coming and speaking. It was amazing. My question is regarding, it's also regarding donors. So you mentioned how they would put on conditions until eventually you came up with your own set of rules. I wanted to ask the middle ground, or like the monitoring and evaluation process, which actually made the donors, come to the fact that, okay, we want this localization and we wouldn't be imposing. So just what that process looked like, what, worked in that case, and how you kept that autonomy.
Well, it wasn't me. This was really Muhammad Yunus, and I was just kind of observing his, and I mean, I like to be a deal maker. I probably wouldn't have taken such a hard line as he did, but I think when he took a hard line about how resources would be used on 2 grounds, I think. Number one, this is our country. We should be in charge of how money is being used, or we should have the ultimate say. But 2, he's like we know what we're doing, and if we don't, we'll figure it out. And so, but how did he know that he knew what he was doing? And because as a leader, there's always a risk that people around you, whether it's your employees, your board, your volunteers, they're going to feed you only the good stories about what's happening and not where things are crashing. And so you always need to be a little like, am I getting the full story here? So that's why he invited in all these various evaluation teams, like third parties that had a professional, ethical commitment to actually tell him what was really going on. And maybe they would, to try to make sure he didn't, rebut them in their own study. Maybe they put a little positive spin on it, but the data had to be true, and it had to be representative. And so when he had enough external researchers who were not dependent upon him for their livelihood or their professional, when enough of them said, you're onto something here that's working, then he's like, then again, why would I allow it, some 27-year-old Swedish guy who's idealistic, who has his PhD in international development, tell me what to do, because what we're doing already works. So he wanted as a nationalistic ground, he wanted to remain control, but where he really felt it was on solid ground was when he had independent people, whether they were foreigners or Bangladeshis, who actually took a hard scientific look at what he was doing and said, it's not perfect, but it's working, and it can work even better if you can make some modifications. And then he said, again, we're in charge here. Give us money if you like what we're doing. Give someone else money if you don't. And those were, and again, the role of, you were linking the kind of the position with the donors with monitoring evaluation. If I understood your question right, that's where they kind of linked up for me. I wouldn't have had the courage to do it. I would have just taken the money, especially at that age, and I would have just said, you're willing to give us millions of dollars and you want to tell us how to use it? Sure. Give me your advice. I'll take most of it, whatever. And he had a different calculus, and it's one of the reasons that he's been so successful and that he's taught me and others so much.
So my apologies to all of us with questions. It's the witching hour. I'm just going to finish up with maybe a question that all of you might be asking yourselves and other people. Look at our environment right now, international affairs, international development, the world as it is right now, USAID, poof. Given that environment, what advice do you have for the students, for their careers, and what they plan to do over the next few years?
Well, it's a good question. I'm not sure I have a good answer to. The changes, the changes that have taken place in the international development, where basically the whole international development industry and ecosystem has been ravaged. I mean, I don't think there's any way else to, and so the question is, when is the pendulum going to swing back in the other direction? And there are other things being ravaged. It's not just that, but that's for us here. And some days I wake up and I think it's going to be pendulum is going to swing back in 4 years, and sometimes I think it's going to swing back in a generation. Like, I may not be alive to see it swing back. And a lot of us, it's about how what we believe and what we're willing to work for and what we're willing to advocate for may have a big role in dictating whether it's 4 years or whether it's a generation. But the other thing is when you kind of clear the decks in such a way, and so many institutions are just eliminated or just hobbled or made a kind of a fraction of what they were. It does open up a possibility for some new thinking, because and so when you think about, there are all sorts of models, social enterprise models, where people are trying to kind of change the world through a market-based approach, and a younger generation where I'm going to eliminate TB in India, or eliminate illiteracy in Zambia, but I'm going to do it in a way that Muhammad Yunus would probably be a big advocate for, where I do it as a kind of a business proposition, where I don't need the international aid money to do it. And just rethinking social change, given that basically we're almost at kind of blank slate here. Let's go back to the drawing board. What are we actually trying to accomplish? And what are the resources we have? We have our own idealism, we have our own intelligence, we have our own personal resources, we have the resource of people around us. Some remaining foundations that do, Ford Foundation has always done incredible work, is use this kind of this bloodletting as a chance to say, how can we kind of reinvent the international development enterprise? And I wrote a piece in the Stanford Social Innovation Review saying, there's a huge, in the order of $20–30 billion that could be mobilized for India from wealthy Indians in this country. And maybe if they were channeled in organizations that didn't have all the accumulated rules and policies and so forth that government and even private institutions have, it might do more good at even a fraction of the cost. And so we need to get creative here and see this in some ways an opportunity. But we also need to and realize that the the pendulum in the humanitarian enterprise will swing back, but maybe when it swings back, we can bring some new ideas, not just recreate the organizations that were effective in some ways, but flawed in others. Let's let some real new thinking emerge, and maybe we'll look back at this as a blessing in disguise.
Well, thank you so much, Alex. Let's give a round of applause.